Right now, somewhere in the world, a person is making the worst decision of their life. Not because they are foolish or uninformed, but because the world around them has collapsed into noise, and they cannot hear themselves think them. You know this feeling. The moment everything moves too fast, the inbox that never clears, the crisis that arrives without warning. And in that moment, the instinct is always the same. React, escalate, match the chaos with equal force. The world tells you that urgency demands urgency, that volume demands volume, that fire must be met with fire. But there is another way. One history has proven, in its most extreme and documented form, produces outcomes urgency never could. It is not passive. It is not weakness. It has a name. Weaponized calm. And the man who mastered it more completely than perhaps any leader of the 20th century did not learn it in a boardroom. He learned it at the edge of civil war. His name was Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, and what he did on the 10th of April 1993 should be studied in every leadership institution on earth. But before we arrive at that night, we need context, because context is everything. South Africa in the early 90s was not transitioning peacefully toward democracy. It was tearing itself apart. 4 years of fragile negotiations. 4 years of a nation holding its breath between breaths. Mandela had been free for 3 years after 27 in prison, and freedom was not the end of the war. It was a different war entirely. Political violence claimed thousands of lives annually. Mistrust was not an undercurrent, it was the current. And into this already fractured landscape, a single gunshot was about to ignite everything. Chris Hani was more than a leader. He was a symbol, and to millions of Black South Africans, he was the future made present. On the morning of April 10th, Chris Hani was shot dead in his own driveway by an assassin connected to the far right. The country did not grieve quietly. It erupted. Within hours, protests spread across every major city. Shops burned, roads closed. The voices on the streets rose to a frequency that sounded less like mourning and more like the prelude to something irreversible. The apartheid government was in crisis. The ANC was in crisis. The negotiations, carefully constructed over so many years, trembled at their foundation. One incendiary speech, one leader who matched street rage with podium rage, and South Africa would cross a threshold it could never uncross. The world watched and held its breath. That evening, Nelson Mandela appeared on national television, and what he did in the next few minutes defied every instinct the moment demanded. He did not shout. He did not perform grief as theater. He did not weaponize Chris Hani's death as political ammunition. He spoke at the pace of someone with nowhere to rush to. Measured, deliberate. He acknowledged the pain with precision, named the anger as legitimate, and then, before the nation could exhale, he pivoted. He asked South Africans to honor Hani not with destruction, but with what Hani had given his life pursuing, a free and democratic South Africa. The streets did not instantly go silent, but the temperature shifted, the trajectory shifted, and the country did not cross that threshold. Historians cite that address as one of the decisive moments that made a peaceful transition possible. A single man, calm, in command of himself at the exact moment when self-command was the only leadership that mattered. Now here is the question that should arrest you. How does a man who lost 27 years, who watched friends die and his family fractured, stand before a furious nation and choose calm? The answer is not temperament. It is not passivity. It is not forgiveness in any soft or sentimental sense. The answer is architecture. A framework so deeply embedded it did not collapse under pressure. It activated under pressure. That framework is precisely what we're going to examine, and it belongs to you as much as it belonged to him. If what you are hearing is landing differently to the usual noise, that is not an accident. This channel exists for those who understand that the quality of their leadership is determined in the moments of greatest pressure. Subscribe, turn on notifications, because what is coming in this series goes deeper into the frameworks that transform ordinary people into anchors for everyone around them. Calm is not the absence of feeling, it is the mastery of timing, and most people in crisis never discover this. He felt everything that April night, the grief, the fury, the weight of responsibility. But across decades of practice, he had developed the ability to separate the moment of feeling from the moment of action. This is the first principle. The pause is not hesitation. The pause is power. In the modern world, speed is presented as competence. Immediate response signals confidence. But watch the most effective people under real pressure. They pause long enough to convert reaction into response. In that gap, he was running calculations. What does this moment require? What is the cost of getting this wrong? That pause is available to you. In the unresolved argument, the unsent email, the meeting trending toward collapse. 5 seconds. The pause that separates, creating more damage from beginning to contain it. Now we go somewhere that almost no one addresses when they discuss Mandela's composure. And this is where the story shifts into territory far less comfortable. What happened on Robben Island was not a spiritual retreat. It was brutal, deliberate psychological warfare designed to break him. And for a period, it worked. There are documented accounts of Mandela in the early years struggling with what we would now recognize as profound despair. The isolation was designed to make him irrelevant, the hard labor to exhaust him, the restriction of information to sever him from any sense of purpose. He was not immune. He was a man in a cell, watching years dissolve, fighting an enemy he could not reach. In that darkness, he made a discovery that would become the second principle of weaponized calm. He discovered that the only jurisdiction he had was internal. He could not control the guards, the courts, or time itself. But he could control, with absolute sovereignty, the meaning he assigned to his circumstances. This is the second principle. In any crisis, the first question is never what is happening. It is, what am I deciding? This means, most people in collapse assign meaning unconsciously. This is catastrophic. This is permanent. This is who I am now. Mandela trained himself to assign meaning consciously, to interrogate the story he told himself and ask, is this the most useful version of this story? The most useful story about 27 years in prison was not that they had destroyed him. It was that they had given him something his opponents could never manufacture. The prison had intended to erase him. Instead, it made him undeniable. That is conscious meaning assignment, the internal move that changes everything. Not the circumstances, the story about them. Apply this to your life, the crisis you're navigating right now, the one that feels like pure loss. What is the most useful story about it? Not a false story, not a minimization, but the version of the truth that leaves you with agency rather than paralysis. That shift in narration is learnable, and it separates those who emerge recalibrated from those who emerge diminished. There is a third principle, and it runs directly counter to everything modern leadership culture tells you about strength. When the room is panicking, the instinct is to be louder than the panic, to assert authority, to perform unaffectedness. But watch what Mandela did that April night. He did not perform unaffectedness. He named the pain openly and stood in the grief of the nation, not above it. By establishing that solidarity, he earned the right to lead them somewhere different. This is the third principle. Refuse to compete for emotional dominance. The most effective anchors in any family or organization are not the loudest voice in the storm. They are the stillest. Stillness communicates something that volume never can. That there is a ground beneath the chaos, that someone has found it, and that it is possible to stand there. That gives people permission to stop escalating, because escalation is no longer the only available language in the room. Now we need to go somewhere unexpected, because the story of Mandela's calm has a dimension almost never examined. The dominant story is that prison made him calm, that suffering wore the anger down, that composure was a byproduct of endurance. This is not accurate, and the inaccuracy matters enormously, because if suffering were the mechanism, calm would be passive, inevitable. The truth is more demanding and more empowering. Mandela chose his calm actively, repeatedly, against genuine and justified rage. Those close to him describe moments after his release when the old anger surfaced, when the accumulated weight of what had been done pressed hard against the composed exterior. In those moments, he did not suppress. He redirected, asking himself one question. What does the movement need from me right now? Not what do I feel, not what do I deserve, but what does this moment require of the version of me that it is calling for? This is the fourth principle. Identity anchoring. Know who you are in the worst moments before you have to decide under fire. Most people make identity decisions reactively, discovering who they are in a crisis by watching what they do. By then, the decision has already been made. Mandela, through years of deliberate self-examination, had pre-decided. He was the architect of reconciliation, the voice that brought people back from the edge. When crisis hit, he already knew who to be. This is available to you today, not after sufficient suffering. It requires deciding in advance who you are in the hard moments. What kind of leader when your team is in freefall? What kind of partner when the relationship cracks? Decide now. The version of you who decides under pressure is not your best version. The version who pre-decides, who walks in already knowing their role. That is the version that changes outcomes. Now we arrive at something history rarely examines closely enough, because what Mandela did after the Hani speech was more sophisticated than anyone typically gives him credit for. Calm without direction simply holds people temporarily. It does not move them. Mandela understood it had to be paired with a compelling picture of forward. In the weeks following Hani's death, he redirected the nation's grief toward the election, toward a future that gave the suffering a meaning it would not otherwise have. This is the fifth principle. Calm without vision is stasis. Vision without calm is noise. Only the combination moves people through crisis towards something better. When the people around you are in freefall, they need two things from their anchor. First, to be met in their emotional reality, named, acknowledged, not managed or minimized. Second, a picture of forward. Not a guarantee, but a direction, a next step, a reason to put one foot forward. That combination is rarer than it should be. Most people offer one without the other. Mandela held both simultaneously, and that capacity was not accidental. It was the product of the framework we have been mapping throughout this conversation. On the 27th of April, 1994, millions of South Africans stood in lines that stretched beyond the horizon. Many had never voted. They waited with a patience that mirrored, not coincidentally, the man who made it possible. A nation had learned that the future worth having is worth waiting for. That calm is not surrender, it is strategy. And here is where history becomes personally relevant to wherever you are right now. The world you are navigating is genuinely chaotic, not metaphorically, measurably, historically. The volume of information demanding your reaction has never been higher, and the speed at which crises compound has never been faster. And the people around you are not looking for someone who never feels it. They're looking for someone who feels it and holds anyway. That's what Mandela was. That's what the people around you are waiting for someone to become. The framework, one final time. The pause is power. In the moment of peak pressure, the deliberate gap between stimulus and response is where your leadership actually lives. Assign meaning consciously. The story you tell about your crisis determines how you move through it. Choose the most useful version of the truth. Refuse to compete for emotional dominance. Meet the room where it is before you attempt to move it anywhere else. Pre-decide your identity. Know who you are in the hard moments before the hard moments arrive. Because the crisis itself is the wrong time to figure that out. Pair calm with vision. Give people somewhere to walk toward. 5 principles. Not one of them requires a prison cell. All of them require a decision. Mandela walked out of prison in 1990, and the world expected him broken or burning. He was neither. He was something so unexpected, so disorienting to his opponents, that it took years for everyone to fully understand what they were witnessing. A man who had turned suffering into architecture. He converted decades of deprivation into a precision instrument for building the exact future he had decided to build. That is weaponized calm, not the absence of the storm, the decision to become the eye of it. If this resonated with you, do not let that shift dissipate. This channel is built for those who are done performing composure and ready to build it, who understand that the most powerful thing they can offer the people they lead is not solutions, it is steadiness. Subscribe. That single decision is not just an algorithm click. It is a declaration that you are choosing the long game, that you are committed to building the internal architecture that crises cannot touch. Mandela had 27 years to build his. You have today, and today is enough to begin. Walk with purpose. Lead with calm. Build the future your anger alone could never reach.